In late 2020, I was working at a chain hotel off the interstate. I won't say which hotel, but it's a major brand. I was training a coworker for the night audit shift. She and I are both females in our mid-20s. Around 3 a.m., after all the paperwork for the day was done, I decided to show her the different room types, starting with the largest suite up on the third floor. Upon arriving on the third floor, we got off the elevator, started walking down the hall, and noticed a man who was sweating profusely just standing in the doorway of his room. He definitely seemed intoxicated, at the least. We walk by him, greeting him as one does, and get no response. The fear was suddenly palpable. We get to the suite I'm showing her, and as soon as the door shuts, I say, "That guy is giving me a weird vibe." I don't think we should walk past him again to get back to the elevator, and suggest we instead continue down the hall to the stairs. As soon as we exit the room, we immediately notice the man is not only not back in his room, but facing us and watching us. I whisper to her, "Girl, take your shoes off. We're gonna run down the steps and out into the parking lot, okay?" She agrees, and we take our shoes off at the top of the stairwell and bolt down the steps and out into the parking lot. We enter back into the building and run into the office and check the cameras. Sure enough, that man had followed us down the steps and was now looking for us in the hallway and by the door to the parking lot. We check the reservation tied to the room number so I can inform my manager and tell him to place this person on the do not rent list. All I remember was that his name was extraordinarily normal, so unforgettable it could have been John Smith. Jump forward to late 2021, and I turn on the local news and see this man who followed us down the steps that night. His name was Anthony Robinson, now dubbed the shopping cart killer, who killed 2 women in Harrisonburg and 2 more that we know of in Northern Virginia. He is known to have utilized hotels to meet and then victimize women he was communicating with online. This was my only close encounter, and definitely creepy in hindsight. So this happened in 2019 in Chicago when I was 27 and my ex-girlfriend was 23, and I don't remember why we ended up at McDonald's that day because she didn't like eating fast food. But what happened there still haunts me, even though there was no physical altercation. It was just off, and I think it's possible someone attempted to traffic her or us, and I wanted to share to get opinions or maybe see if anyone has had a similar encounter in Chicago, because I've always had the impression that the man who approached us was in a familiar environment. For context, my ex is very pretty. I'm also a fairly big dude with cauliflower ears and tattoos, so men rarely approached her when we were out together. But this guy was different, and thinking about his eyes still makes me feel a fight-or-flight response. We were sitting off by ourselves doing the annoying couple thing where you both sit on the same side of the table. We were also back against a wall facing into the rest of the seating area. The McDonald's wasn't very busy, and this dude just kind of appeared a few feet from our table. And even that is strange to me because I tend to be hyper-vigilant in public spaces because of some stuff I've been through. But this dude was just there all of a sudden. And he wasn't a particularly big man, maybe a bit under 6 feet tall, I'd say mid to late 40s, and wearing business formal clothes. I remember the clothes because he was wearing a burgundy and dark red tie against a blue shirt, though I don't remember if he had a suit jacket on or not. But again, it was his eyes that really caught me and us off guard. I don't know if it was just the way he caught us off guard, but remembering his eyes afterward was the first time I ever questioned if the paranormal was real. They were so intense I can still see them, very blue, and he didn't blink as he shifted them from her to me and then back to her, and he smirked at me before fixating on my ex. Then he stepped forward, took one of my fries, dipped it in my ketchup, said, The ice cream here is good, but it's not my favorite. Before putting the fry in his mouth and chewing it with that smirk not changing on his face, and he didn't blink at all, just stared at my ex, chewed my fry, swallowed, kind of flicked his tongue out of his mouth, paused for a moment, then started to talk. I don't remember his words exactly, but my ex and I ran it back and forth enough times that I have a good recollection of a lot of it. The first thing he said post-fry was, "I have the ability to change your life." Then he said something about flying to Florida or driving to get milkshakes. Then he said, $40,000 would change your lives, wouldn't it? I have much more than that. Then he looked at me and said something like, "I bet you'd trade something precious for $100,000. And please note that neither my ex nor I had said anything at this point. I also don't think he'd blinked. And just the weirdness of what he talked about, as if he was trying to entice us to go with him. He said something about a secret room in a church on the Mile. My ex said she thought he might have meant the Magnificent Mile, and a high place in New York he'd take us to. And when I declined for us, I don't even remember what I said to decline, he said something about showing us a computer no one knows about. The ex and I both thought we remembered him saying quantum computer, but I'm not sure. But that we wouldn't understand the future when we saw it anyway, and he just looked at her with no blinks. Then, when we didn't respond, his eyes shifted to me. He looked me directly in the eye and said something that's burned into my mind. He said, "I can pay someone millions to bring her to me, or you, so you better put a ring on it." What? Then he took another fry, dipped it, ate it, then left the McDonald's, and I'm pretty sure he didn't blink the whole time. So I don't know. My ex and I had multiple discussions about whether or not the encounter really happened or if we'd hallucinated it. But we weren't on any drugs, and both of us remembered the same stuff. And something that bugs me is that we both felt kind of hypnotized or paralyzed, and that's definitely not like me. Very disconcerting. I also don't know if the dude was on drugs either, but part of what's haunting beyond the eyes, or maybe because of them, is that his face kind of looked like a mask, which I don't think it was a mask, but something hit our uncanny valley. And I still wonder what would have happened if we left that McDonald's with him, though the feeling I have is that it wouldn't have been good. Anyway, I hope that wasn't boring and that I conveyed how weird that moment was to us. Please let me know if you've had a similar encounter. Again, we were in Chicago. At the time, I, 16-year-old female, was in the car with my mother, 36-year-old female, taking my young brother for a drive since he was teething. It was around 1 a.m. and we were running low on petrol, so we went to a self-pump station. There was one other car with a man, and he looked pretty nice, and he gave both me and my mom a quick wave. Soon after my mom finished putting the fuel in the car, he waved her to drive out first, which just seemed like he was trying to be polite. My mom thanked him and started to drive. We picked up on the fact that he was going in the exact same direction as us, and we didn't think anything of it at first. After multiple roundabouts, we started to feel a little uncomfortable, so my mom pulled over so that he could keep driving. However, he pulled in behind us. At this point, we were a bit freaked out, and my mom pulled off pretty quickly. But he continued to follow and was flashing his lights at us. At this point, he was following us for around 45 minutes, and my mom stopped indicating and started using the wrong positioning to try and make him stop, but he was always not too far behind. At this point, we were trying to convince ourselves that it was a coincidence, but as time went on, it was obvious he was following us. We continued to drive and were looking on Google Maps for police stations. We weren't close to any at the time, but we were coming close to a slip road, So my mom positioned in for the slip road and suddenly moved the car out of the direction of the slip road over to the marked area. This time they went down the slip road and he turned to look at us, and I looked into the car to make sure it was the same person from the petrol station. It was him. However, he didn't look so nice anymore, but he looked extremely annoyed. One thing I did notice that we didn't see in the station was that there was another man in the back seat. I don't know why they so desperately wanted to follow us, but I can say we didn't sleep well after that happened. I worked for a small office that consisted of only 5 employees. More often than not, between taking vacation or being out sick, I found myself being the only person working on Fridays or Mondays more times than I can count. One afternoon, I walked down the hallway to go to the bathroom, and while I was in the bathroom, I could swear I heard what sounded like footsteps above my head. No one else was in the building at the time, and it was a 1-story building, so that would mean that someone was on the roof. I came out of the bathroom and walked through the building, but felt very uneasy because I could swear I heard something on the roof, but couldn't make out what it was. After that, it was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. On another occasion, I was in the kitchen area of the building, and again, I could swear that I heard what sounded like footsteps. Not near the kitchen area itself, but somewhere down the hallway that led to the kitchen. Anyway, I walked around the building alone and didn't hear anything else the rest of the afternoon, but this time the hair on my arms was standing up. The time between these experiences was at least 4 months. On a couple of occasions, I asked my coworkers when they were in the building with me if they ever heard anything strange. Oddly enough, each of them said that there were times when they thought they heard strange activity on the roof, but couldn't make out what it could be. Finally, one day I was in the kitchen cleaning my coffee mug, and out of nowhere I see this tall, slender young guy standing right outside the window looking suspicious. I could see out, but he couldn't see in. He kept looking back and forth and paying special attention to the parking lot area. At that moment, 2 of my coworkers were actually leaving, but my immediate supervisor was still in their office. After they proceeded to pull out of the parking lot, he literally turned around and flew right up the fire escape ladder onto the roof. I didn't think it was humanly possible to go up a ladder as quickly as he did. I went to my supervisor's office and immediately told them what I had just seen. They decided to call the non-emergency police number, and 2 squad cars were immediately dispatched to our building. They proceeded to go up the ladder and found that this person had obviously been living on the roof. They had set up a hot plate, a tent, a laundry line, and had food stash in numerous bags all over the roof. I was so creeped out when I realized that someone had actually been living on the roof that I felt sick to my stomach. A part of me felt bad for this person, but another part of me was really upset because I could have fallen victim to whatever could have happened if I ever encountered this person. They left without incident, but to this day, I refuse to work at any job where I will be alone in a building. Some backstory. In the late 80s, I moved to a large city during my junior and senior year of high school. I grew up in a small rural town a couple of hours away. I was living with my best friend, so she would pick me up after her shift, usually around 11 p.m., except weekends. One night, we stopped to get gas, and I was surprised to see a girl working from my hometown. I knew that Becky had a hard home life and basically raised her siblings. She was a quiet, shy person, but sweet as could be. So we made it a habit to stop there and chat, have a cig, hang out sometimes. Well, one night we stopped, and there was a man sitting by the gas pump on a motorcycle, which was no big deal, except something about him just gave me a creepy vibe. Becky told us he had been there a while, so we stayed until he left. I was getting excited because I was going on vacation with some family the next day. We said our see you laters, and we left. The second day I was gone, My friend called me crying to tell me Becky had been brutally killed, and it was the man on the motorcycle that had done it. As the news reported, we found out that he had been in prison for years and recently had gotten out. He told the police he didn't know how to live on the outside, so he wanted to do something to get a life sentence. After he did it, he went outside and sat on his motorcycle until an officer came by and noticed he could not see an attendant at the station. He went in and found her in the bathroom when he got back outside to radio it in. He asked the man how long he had been there and if he had seen anyone, and the man replied, "I'm the one that did it." Very matter of fact. I had been staying at a motel while on a business trip in Mobile, Alabama. One day I decided to walk to Zaxby's for lunch. It was only a short distance across the street from the motel near a pretty busy intersection, so as a young woman I felt pretty secure doing that in the middle of the day. As I was just exiting the motel's parking lot, about to begin to cross the street, not in a crosswalk, I noticed an older-style, rust-orange-colored, perhaps Chevy Chevelle or maybe Oldsmobile Cutlass, sorry, I really don't know old cars, pulled into the empty parking lot across the street exactly where I would be heading if I stayed on my current trajectory. I remember thinking it was a weird place to park your car because he had parked the vehicle only in the entrance of this empty parking lot, not in a parking spot. Then I noticed a tall, heavier-set man step out of the driver's seat and walk to the trunk, open the trunk, stand to the side of the opened trunk, and just look at me as I'm getting closer and closing the distance between us. Every alarm bell is going off in my head as a really bizarre thing he is doing, but at this point I'm exactly halfway across the street in the middle of the road and realize I'm going to have to be the asshole who everybody obviously changes her course to avoid walking any closer to this man. I decided I'd take the chance of looking like an asshole and immediately U-turn my body back to the motel side of the street. During this time of changing my direction, this man gets back into his car and pulls across the street directly in front of me and into the entrance of the motel parking lot that I'm about to pass, and looks straight at me with his window about 2 inches down. After seeing the way he's looking at me, I very quickly change directions yet again and quickly walk back across the street and make a beeline for Zaxby's. Anyone watching would have witnessed me zigzagging across this street about 3 times, if memory serves me. Anyway, I didn't get kidnapped, but I think that was his intention, and that creeped me the hell out. So, when I was in high school, I worked at Walmart. There were a few in the town that I grew up in, but this one was by far the biggest. It was also generally the easiest to get to because several huge roads ran right by it. Because of that, working as a cashier, I saw all sorts of people at all stages in their lives. Most people are nice enough, but every now and then I'd get somebody that just made me wonder about them. I was working later than I normally did one night because the Weather Channel was calling for snow late that night and school had been canceled. Great, I don't mind. I could use the hours. It was slow, though, because the normal pre-snowstorm rush had already been through, and now people were just holed up at home waiting for the storm. I was on one of the express lane registers and finally had a customer come up. He only had a few things, but the first red flag was the way that he put them up on the counter. Normally, when you only have a few things, you just set them all up at once, right? He held them out to me individually and would make sure that his fingers touched mine when I took them from him. After I rang up his few things and bagged them, I told him the total, and he handed me the payment all in ones and change, which meant I had to count it, so it took a minute or two longer than a credit card transaction might have. In that time, he's trying to make conversation about how he was just at the club, With all the ones he had and the amount of meth it looked like he consumed on a daily basis, I can imagine what club it was. And all the girls had turned him down, so now he was just going to have to go home all alone and eat a sandwich on his own. I made some sort of sympathetic noise, finished counting, and tried to give him his change and receipt. He made no move to get them from me, and instead kept on talking about how they'd taste so much better with someone else. Getting nervous, I made some sort of comment about my being underage because with the way he was looking at me, I was pretty sure he was referencing me. Then he leaned across the register, ran his tongue across his nasty teeth, and said, "Well, honey, that don't matter unless someone tells." For a second, I stood there in shock, then set his stuff down on the belt, turned out my light, and walked away to find a manager. I was lucky to have the mama bear one on shift that night, so I knew she'd take my side when she found out what happened. So to meth mouth guy that insinuated he was fine with taking a minor home, let's not meet again. Long-time lurker, but this story warranted a post in this sub. It happened years ago, but I can't seem to shake it even now. I also recently watched the movie The Watcher, highly recommend, and it triggered the memory even more. It was 2005. I was in my very early 20s and lived alone in a big suburb of a large Midwestern city. My apartment complex had several buildings spread out, with some neighboring buildings facing mine. I worked full-time in retail and, at the time, partied a lot with my coworkers and friends, so I was constantly coming and going at all hours. It was summertime, and I began noticing that as I came and went from my place, there would be whistling in the distance, no matter what time of day or night. It seemed to happen every time I either went to my car to leave or walked from my car to the building coming back. The sidewalk from my parking space to the front door was fairly long, so it took maybe 90 seconds to get from point A to point B, all the while being exposed in the open with no trees or obstructions to the view of that walkway. I was clearly visible to whoever this was. However, I could never see them. While the other buildings faced mine, they were a bit too far back to make out anyone in a window. All I could see were black squares with the occasional moving of curtains in various windows peppered throughout the buildings. This went on for a couple of months. I began dreading every walk in and out of my building. I could feel someone watching me from the minute I walked out of the front vestibule. The whistles were loud, some long, some short, but they always happened. Girlfriends of mine who would visit never heard a thing as they walked to and from my building. I started feeling like a target. I even tried parking behind my building rather than in front, but the whistler kept going. Finally, I walked out to my car one day and found a note on my windshield. It said something along the lines of, "I promise I'm not a creeper, but I've seen you around and I think you're beautiful. I'd love to get to know you. Here's my number. Blah, blah." He reiterated maybe 3 times in that note that he wasn't a stalker or a creeper. I was immediately freaked out because I knew it was the Phantom Whistler, and he'd definitely been watching me come and go for some time. I took the note to the property office and showed it to the complex manager. She laughed it off and told me I should be flattered that someone thought I was pretty and wanted to get to know me. I argued that it was terrifying to know that some unknown person was constantly whistling and watching me. She said that since no other tenants had complained of similar incidents, I should just chalk it up to a dude having a crush on me. She even went so far as to say that maybe I shouldn't go out as much or work at night, like I was bringing all this upon myself by working and living my life. Not long after this, I started seeing a pretty tall, athletically built guy. Almost immediately after bringing him to my apartment for the first time, the whistling stopped. But I would still get the overwhelmingly uneasy feeling of being watched as I came and went. Even when the guy was with me, he even mentioned on occasion feeling weird when we were outside. I moved out a few months later. No way was I going to keep giving rent money to a place that A, didn't take my concerns seriously, and B, allowed management to literally laugh in my face when I expressed being scared. It still frustrates me all these years later. Hey, Vickies. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe and hit the like button, as it helps my videos be recommended to more people who could enjoy it just like you are. If you have a suggestion or simply want to say hello, please leave a comment. I love to hear what you guys have to say. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description, as are other ways to support the channel if you feel so inclined. I post 2 to 3 times a week, as often as I can, and I'm so happy to have you here. It's appreciated beyond measure. And until next time, be good.